We asked HR technologists, like if you own HR technology in your company, we asked what are your primary responsibilities? Is one of the new questions we added last year. And all the systems made sense, and you were like at 80% for payroll and HRMS and some other things, and down to 30% of people said it was labor technology, which again, fewer people have that. But what was really interesting was the number one thing, even for small organizations, was not on the sort of non-tech side, right? Which was on the sort of the processes that you would own as an HR technologist. The number one thing was HR data management, which was more important than implementation work, which was more important than even an HR system strategy. That was the thing they expected the person who owned the HR technology systems to own the HR data management.
Welcome to the HR Huddle podcast, presented by Sapient Insights Group, the ultimate resource for all things HR. It's time to get in the huddle.
Welcome everyone to Spilling the Tea on HR Tech, where we focus on the hottest HR tech news everyone needs to know to be in the know. We break down the news of the week and help you make sense of what it means for our industry and how it can impact your organization. And we are recording today on March, is that 12th already? 2026. I can't believe we're already into third quarter, or at least, I'm sorry, listen to me, getting close to the end of first quarter with the third month of the year. That's where I was going with that. Tells where I have it. It'll be a pretty punchy event today because both you and I were on red eyes last night.
That's right.
Anyway, we're bringing you all the news you can use this week. I'm your host, Stacey Harris, Chief Research Officer and Managing Partner for Sapient Insights Group, a research and advisory firm. And joining me today is my co-host and colleague in sleep deprivation, Stevenson, Director of Research and Principal Analyst for Sapient Insights Group. Cliff, welcome to the show today. We're going to get through this afternoon, but we feel like there's so much more news. We cannot possibly put it off another day at this point, right?
That's right. We keep joking about the length of the show, and we've gotten some feedback, including some live, that, it is long, and we do get that. We're not trying to do it, but it's hard to think of stuff to cut. Also, I'm going to go ahead and plug the fact that even though it was a red eye, we both came back to these wonderful new environments we find ourselves in. You seem to be in Hobbiton, Stacey, and I'm here at my Inception-esque weird background high-rise in what looks like to be Hong Kong or New York, out of new secondary headquarters, I guess.
That's right. This is a big thank you to your friend who felt that our backgrounds were a little boring and sad, and he came to us and said, look, I can build you some new backgrounds, right? And so I got my wish, which was a very homey and comfortable hobbit hole, which is where I would like to be at today, warm, which is not like what it is in North Carolina here in Cary, which is very cold today on this wonderful day in March, with a fire crackling. And if anybody knows me, this is exactly the kind of place that I would love to just chill out in. So he did a very nice job. Please tell him thank you. And we're gonna use him today so everybody gets to see him.
That's right. And it would definitely be a good environment to share some tea, both literal and figuratively, as we have quite a bit of news. And I'll say before we get started too, and we can start getting through everything, there's often times on this show where the tea is too hot. We are privy to a lot of information that's under NDA, and because we record this a week before it goes out, we do have to sort of play around with the dates and figure out, and we always try and err on the side of protecting things that are under NDA, even if it's like they might have come out or be. So keep in mind that when it is this long, that we're also cutting stuff, and we're trying to give you basically all the information you need to stay up to date and to make decisions with. But there were a few news stories, mostly having to do with just rebrands or new releases and things like that we will cover. But know that we're definitely not trying to withhold information from you. We've got a lot anyway, so definitely we want to get all that information to you. But there's some good stories this week, although I do like that there's going to be a good mix. Sometimes it seems like it's all M&A activity, and sometimes it seems like everyone's just got a new AI agent. And this we get a little bit of everything.
We really do. And before we jump in, because we don't want to take too much time on it, but we do want to just make a shout out for our good friend Tammy Smith, who is frantically trying to get all the last minute distributors into the annual HR system survey distribution process. If you have not signed up yet, please do so. I think we have almost everyone back, but there are a few that she's still waiting on who have not done their due diligence. And if you are new to the process, please let us know. Every year we increase the number of people who work with us and participate in the annual HR system survey. That survey will be going out April 15th. So you have to get it in the next couple of weeks or you just won't be able to make it. And then our public launch is April 29th for this year's annual HR system survey. And Cliff and I are frantically working through final question updates. If you are one of those people who talked to us about giving us questions and you wanted it in there, only have a couple of days left. We got 2 yesterday that someone gave me. And I think you and I, Cliff, are going to work through the last of the AI questions this week to finalize what we're going to ask new about what's going on in the AI space. And I just spoke about with the team who's working on the finance questions earlier today. And so we have our list of 10 or so finance system questions. If you have a finance person who normally takes the survey, or if you want to get some more details on finance, please make sure they participate this year. They'll have a section just for them. Always a big part of our year is when the survey goes live.
Yeah. We even, I think, got a little bit of feedback from an event we were just at. We were at iSolve Market Makers, which is a sort of smaller, more, I don't want to say intimate, that's probably the wrong word, right? But, sort of close-knit group of the brokers and sort of centers of influence that they do. And they had some really good points to make as well about some information they would like to see that would be important to our broker friends that we like to work with as well. So really give it some thought. No matter who you are, we do want to make sure that you got all the information you need or want. And we will do our best to get that in there. Tammy, if you're listening, we're sorry. We're making these promises.
Yeah, I think the broker conversation was interesting, though, because it's a market. I think like 6 years ago when I first started looking into it, you and I both had discussed that how much it's changed. But I thought that the broker community, and maybe 6 years is probably longer than that. It was before COVID. It was probably back when we first saw a couple of new organizations like Zenefits enter the space, right? We really thought brokers might go the direction of like travel agents or even our insurance brokers that, people used to always have an insurance broker for your personal insurance, but now people just go online and purchase their insurance. Back in the day, my parents had a person who used to help them figure that out. That I don't have that, right? I don't think that's the case. What we've seen instead in our data is that the brokers who help organizations acquire and purchase and make decisions about both healthcare insurance as well as global insurance and other insurance things that are needed for organizations are increasing in their time that organizations are spending with them, with the need that the organizations want from them, and in some cases in their role as technology advisors and people who are advising them on other HR issues. 65% on average of companies under 2,500 told us that their broker was a major part of their way they run HR this year, right? Which is something you and I hadn't pulled, because once you go up market, that gets a little bit smaller, but it was quite interesting to see how high it was, right?
Absolutely. And you also did some look at the outcomes, right, of those that went to third-party HR assistants versus those that didn't. And that was a pretty drastic, definitely in the statistical significance range in terms of improvement. Do you remember the exact number? I do. I'm just...
Go ahead, Cliff. You can go ahead.
It was 90% more likely to be viewed as contributing strategic value if you use outside assistance, third-party HR resources, rather than just staying in-house. So, we're always hyper aware of this chicken and egg, right? I didn't have the money, so I couldn't go there. And that's because our company isn't doing well, sure. But it also can tell you that there is a very strong possibility that if you are able to get those resources, you will see a return on them. So fight hard for getting the help needed. It's interesting when our data sort of coalesces like this, right? Because we know that people are spending less time in the role or have less tenure in their roles. We know that there's more integrations than ever, right? And that the things are becoming more complex, and now we're having to know everything from, the AI capabilities. I remember we joked like, now you're going to have to know data governance. And now it's like, that's...
Well, it was when we asked HR technologists, like if you own HR technology in your company, we asked, what are your primary responsibilities? Is one of the new questions we added last year. And all the systems made sense, and you were like at 80% for payroll and HRMS and some other things, and down to like, 30% of people said it was labor technology, which again, fewer people have that. But what was really interesting was the number one thing, even for small organizations, was not on the sort of non-tech side, right? Which was on the sort of the processes that you would own as an HR technologist, the number one thing was HR data management, which was more important than implementation work, which was more important than even an HR system strategy. That was the thing they expected the person who owned the HR technology systems to own the HR data management. And you and I, that's a big part of all of this, right? That we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually a little bit of what we talked about in a webinar that I recently did. As we sort of noted that we've seen some sort of patterns when we do these podcasts, right? The news. In fact, we've actually started datafying those trends in the last few presentations we went to. And we noted that compliance seems to be coming more and more up often as a topic, right? Which is pretty interesting. And on that line, I had recently done a sort of jointly presented, hosted webinar with both Insperity and HR Dive called Proven Strategies to Scale HR and Align with Business Growth. It was heavily focused on not seeing alignment as something to get past, but as something to build upon, right? Or compliance, I should say. But I could see both of those kind of going together, right? Get your compliance, get your house in order. In fact, that's the analogy we use throughout. So I definitely take a listen if that's something that interests you. It was recorded, but you can still you can just do a search for any of the terms I used and you'll find it. And then I'll also be recording one with Bridge this Friday that I believe, so by the time you hear this, that should be out. So if you look for Sapient Insights Group along with Bridge, you'll see it as part of a podcast series going over AI and compliance in that space as well.
Yeah, and I think in the next couple of weeks, I will be doing a webinar with a good friend, Brett Starr, isn't it? I think. Right.
Ungashak from...
Yes. No, that I got my name wrong. Maybe. Anyways, we'll put the notes in the thing. But basically, it's about how to use analysts. And it was a panel that we were asked. I was asked to be part of. I think Sarah White's on it. I think there's a couple other people that we know who are on it. My apologies for not having it ready because I just thought about it as you said, Jeff, the one you're doing with Bridge because it's a new one that we're doing. We need to get them added to our agenda. So I think both you and I are going to be on a couple of things where we're just talking about what's happening in the market, right?
Yeah, I know that we don't have any firm dates yet, but also if you're interested in strategic workforce management as a whole, we're going to be doing one with Workday sometime during the Northern Hemisphere summer. I was about to just say summer, and I was like, wait, we have a lot of friends in APAC, so in the month of July, let's go with that. So as we get more details, we'll move that on. Something we do have some details on is some mergers and acquisitions. I didn't say there weren't any, I said there weren't as many. So I think the biggest one was from Perceptyx, who acquired Lyceum. First of all, very cool. So Perceptyx, I can remember from back in the day when they thought of themselves and built themselves as employee listening, right? That was what they did. And a lot of their name comes from that. And they have since sort of expanded, right, into the entire employee experience platform. It's not just about one-way gathering of information. And this is sort of that next step, right? Because Lyceum is an AI learning company. So, right, you have all that information. Now, how do you use that to improve skills throughout the business and meet changing needs in sort of real time? So very fascinating. Now, what other thing I'm going to say is just as someone who reports on a lot of HR tech news, I quite like these names like Perceptyx and Lyceum. I'm so glad it's not just these 2-syllable ones with all the vowels cut out. These are nice names. They're fun to say. So thank you, two companies.
Well, and what I really liked on this conversation, outside of the names, which come a little bit maybe from Latin in that, which helps a little bit. Right?
Latin,
but Lyceum is all about hyper personalization on the learning side, which I think is kind of interesting when you pair that with the idea of employee listening and employee experience, because the idea of employee experience that we know that the whole market's been trying to get to, which is the idea of hyper personalized experiences for employees through the lens of what HR is providing, right? Because I, as an individual employee, just am very different, each and every one of us. You and I just talked about that this week when we were traveling, which is, what is it like to sort of manage a group of people who are very different in personalities and backgrounds and experiences, especially if they have varying different ways of thinking about things and varying different ways of sort of getting work done. So on the learning side, we've known this for a long time. My background originally was in adult learning and in learning and development. And so I always love the idea of hyper personalization. We've never honestly been able to do it, no matter how hard we tried with sort of role-based technology to some extent. There wasn't enough ways you could branch and options of branching that you could give that would give you truly hyper-personalized learning. With AI now, the possibilities are very real with that. And so I'm very interested in seeing what Lyceum is doing. I think I briefed with them once, maybe a couple of years ago, So, but I'm really excited to see this paired up with Perceptyx, right?
Yeah. And speaking of things that have been hyped for a long time, they're never going to happen. We get Meta acquiring Moltbook, which is an AI agent social network. The thing I'm joking about never happening is the idea of AGI or truly autonomous agents, because a lot of times with this reporting, it sort of gives a sense of, I don't know, self to AI that I think doesn't do any of us. It doesn't make the people talking about it look good, and it doesn't help you as the listener when we kind of anthropomorphize. Man, I knew I was going to say that word. When we try and make them seem more human than they actually are. So this notebook is, I'm going to use their words, right? It was designed as a Reddit-like platform where AI bots can speak to one another, ask questions, and swap code and anecdotes. I think that is more or less kind of humanizing a little bit too much, right? Stacey, you had pointed out a story of whenever this seemed to happen, right? There was a story that I think we put on the cutting room floor last time.
Yeah, we chose not to actually talk about. So probably about a month ago, maybe a little bit more than that, you would have heard the whole internet kind of exploded that there was a Reddit forum that AI agents were talking to AI agents. There was no humans who had built it, right? And there was a big uproar about it. And, oh my gosh, they're talking to each other. They're gonna, get together and talk about how they're gonna end the world. I think us as humans are doing that fast enough. They don't have to worry about waiting for AI to do it right now. But outside of that very gloomy look on it, what we found, I went in and did some research on it, and I actually looked at a couple of really good articles done by Wired and by someone from The Atlantic, and they went in and posed as human beings in there who were basically posed as bots as human beings. They were able to create environments, and they said that what they found is that the interaction that they got felt a little bit like maybe there were other human beings who were pretending to be bots, and then the real bots, the most engagement they got was welcome, and then nothing beyond that. So the amount of engagement or interaction was probably overhyped in that environment, and I think everybody just kind of looked at the headline. Not to say that agents can't have interactions with other agents, especially if you design them to have those interactions, but I thought this was an interesting one from Meta, because more so here is the idea that they are going to be using it to train. I thought that was the interesting thing. It was sort of a training environment to some extent that they were creating with this new technology. Cliff, if I understood a little bit of what they were doing as well, right?
Yeah, there's that, and there's also what's sort of underlying it is pretty interesting. So most of these sort of agents and these interactions are the sort of background language is OpenClaw, so an open source framework that allows all of these different agents, whether they're from Anthropic, Claude, ChatGPT, whether they're Google's, whichever, you can use natural language through OpenClaw's technology to use, any of your messaging and just, your Slack bots and your WhatsApps, so that you're able to sort of create this way for them to speak. It's right. That's the sort of, now I'm doing it. Now I'm putting it in human language, but I'm just trying to help myself and hopefully help you guys understand it. So that's pretty interesting, because that really does, that sort of technology and the use case for that will have quite an effect on how it gets put into the sort of background and workflows throughout much of the technology that we use, even if this particular tech isn't the case. And there may be something else going on here with this particular acquisition, because, they didn't disclose the price. They don't know exactly the time frame, but they did make the point that the co-founders, Matt Schlicht and Ben Parr, will join Meta's research engine. They may have been buying people here. I'm not saying they are or not, but it's just a possible read of this as well, that their skills is what they really wanted, which is now that makes sense. That's an HR.
Yeah, we do know there's a lot of talent stealing right now happening across all of these guys. Like, they're all trying to poach whoever is the brightest and most forward-looking programmers and sort of strategists in this space, right?
Well said, yeah. And speaking of the story you had mentioned, there was a good story that also didn't make it from 404 Media, which is a lot of the old Vice people. It said AI stands for African intelligence, because a lot of times it is just lower wage workers that are doing a lot of the training of AI and doing a lot of the work. Something to think about. So we also have some other kind of big news. This isn't an acquisition or a merger so much as it is a strong partnership, one that we've mentioned before but is now in general availability, which is Insperity and Workday creating Insperity HRScale. So this really allows Workday to reach a whole set of customers. Well, really both platforms, right? To reach sets of customers that they probably wouldn't have before. So this is really interesting, I think.
Yeah, this is going to have a huge impact on the down mark. So 500 and below, and then slightly above that, sort of 500, probably a little bit bigger. So that space that's in, hot contention right now, because I think we're at least hearing pretty clearly signals from Workday that they're not going to go below 500, except for in very special situations, right? Per employees. Now, anyway, anybody can buy a solution, and we see a lot of organizations spin off a solution or they get smaller, and so they end up having Workday. Our numbers actually, there's quite a few of their customers who are in that below 500 number, right? But what's really interesting here is that we ultimately have to think about what we're seeing in the Insperity space, which is they are not only do they have a very large group of just customers in general, and they have their own PEO technology that they're now replacing with Workday technology that will allow them to not only increase the size of their PEOs, but it will also allow them to have a more strategic role on the PEO and hold people on that technology longer. And then once they're ready to roll off of it, the hope for Workday, I think, is that it'll roll on right onto Workday then, right?
Right. And then Workday is also, along with that, stayed in the news, right? Because they've been sort of, I think they're referring to this as the fourth phase of their AI strategy. It's very Marvel coded, right? Which phase are we in now? So this is one you work very closely with all of this, Stacey.
Yeah,
So I'm going to kind of rely on you to explain what's happening here.
Yeah, this was a big sort of hushed announcement last week coming out of embargo on the 17th. So, we're hoping all of our production people will keep that under wraps through the 17th as we get into the news cycle here with this. But really, I think the big thing here, the big announcement, is that they are expanding the Sana acquisition that they made late last year into a much bigger enterprise sort of AI play across the entire both Workday environment, but the enterprise as well, making it a tool that can be used outside of the Workday environment. And that's, I think, the biggest news. My sense from what I heard here, if I understood, is that the Illuminate brand, many know the Illuminate brand as an AI brand that Workday had rolled out early on, is now going to be sort of subsumed underneath the Sana brand as the Sana AI environment. What was really, I think, interesting on this, and I got a chance to listen to the replay. I did not get to go to the full version, but I did clearly see that Anil was front and center in here. Many of you know that Anil came back as the CEO and has recently taken the reins under the AI conversation, emphasized the importance of Joel and Garrett, who have been in their roles on technology and AI strategy, and how much the Sana solution is going to play across the entire organization. He also emphasized not only that they've been doing AI for a long time, which I think we've known that, our data shows that they were one of the, last year when we looked at this, they were one of the most well-known solutions to have AI and people using AI in all of the technology areas. But he also noted that they were very focused on deterministic versus probabilistic. I could never say it.
Both of us got the
Yes.
long words today.
Yeah. But the deterministic focus is what he says, that their solution is that, which what we're really seeing is that the distinction between a rules and guided, and it's going to get the right answer. It's not going to come up with an assumed answer based off of some probable perception and probable data sets, right? It's an actual answer based off the data that you have inside of the environment. That was one of the big things that he was really emphasizing. I think the other thing that we saw, and then we'll get more details on this as we go into the next couple of weeks, is this idea that they're going to have like Sana for Workday, Sana for all your enterprise, which goes across applications that may or may not be inside of Workday. So within that Sana for Workday, they're going to have a Sana agent environment for HR, a Sana agent environment for finance, and then they have all the solutions underneath that. Again, that doesn't surprise, I think, anybody. I think the step up to Sana for all enterprise, even outside of Workday, is the piece that's a little bit news and interesting that they hadn't really made a lot of news about previously. And then the Sana self-service agent, if I understood, is going to maybe be able to cross again across various platforms. I think those two things are the big announcements outside of sort of just this really big emphasis that we're focusing on deterministic as our primary here. So they're calling it three simple layers when you look at it within it, and the ability to sort of buy into those three simple layers. Now, one of the things that we had mentioned not too long ago was their new sort of pricing model, which is going to play into this conversation, and something we've been seeing a lot of the conversation. So they are definitely already in the sort of credit pricing model. You get some credits to start out with, and then you're going to sort of how much activity depends on how many credits you're going to purchase as part of the overall AI conversation. Now, they have embedded AI, which I think is going to stay at the price of the solution, but then this is the stuff that goes above that. But the thing that you and I have been talking a lot about, Cliff, which I think everyone in the market should be paying attention to, which is the idea of APIs or are you going to charge the MCP to access your data versus an employee? Now, this is a bigger issue for solutions like finance or tools that don't normally have a PEPM relationship. In other words, they aren't saying, okay, you're a company of 500 employees. Even if your employees don't, everyone doesn't touch it, I'm still going to charge you as the amount per employee for the solution. If, for example, I have a really good example is planning technology. Oftentimes, the only people in the planning technology are your planning and analytics people. That might be 10 license, but you charge like $100,000, $200,000 for that one planning technology because of who it all reaches at an extended level, right? And the amount of play that it has inside your system. This is sort of similarly the same issue is that am I going to let this data be pulled into an MCP or to another environment? Am I going to charge for every time it gets accessed through my APIs? That is a conversation happening at every big enterprise level. It is part of the fact that many organizations are already starting to feel the pinch that the biggest barrier for using AI for organizations over 5,000 employees is now, by and large, over 40% of them said is its cost. And we're going to continue to see that cost conversation come up, I think.
Yeah. And when you're saying MCP, you're referring to that sort of integration layer in between the AI agents and the worker, right? Yeah. I know we introduced it as a concept, but it probably doesn't come up a lot for people. So just reminding you of that idea.
Yeah, and how it pulls that data and then exports that data into different places and ways. How much do I charge for all of that? That's machine to machine, not so much human to machine. So then I don't have a login. What does that look like? All those things, right?
Yeah. And speaking of that sort of AI agentic model, not surprisingly, we're seeing this from a few different companies. Definitely some NDA here. We can just say vaguely that you'll see some announcements. It probably won't be a big surprise from Clear Company or whatever they're called by the time that announcement comes out. But we do know that specifically Paychex will have some workforce management AI. So this is pretty interesting. I like that they are utilizing some of the capabilities that they were able to bring in-house during the Paycor acquisition to kind of do this in. So they're able to use AI and to do things like labor forecasting and budget tracking for smaller businesses. That's pretty cool. It's probably not one of those things where, it's not the coolest headline of all time. You probably wouldn't run home and tell your kids about this, but the more...
No, some kids are excited by compliance. Let's not
they're like, oh my goodness, probably one of my nephews actually. But it is pretty cool to see these capabilities come in, not just as that's neat, but it's almost because it's becoming necessary. We've talked quite a bit about just the increased globalization even of small businesses out of necessity and the need to deal with, in the post-COVID world, of course, people being in different locations, but disruptions to supply chain and things like that. Tons of different reasons why even small businesses need to be able to take a more predictive view of their workforces beyond being just completely reactive. So having AI agents to me is a meaningful use case. It is not just like, oh, wow, what a cool feature. I think this is speaking to some of the needs of these businesses.
Yeah, and I think this also speaks to the fact that we know Paychex and Paycor, their merger and acquisition happened, over the last several months. And, we got a quote here from Ryan Bergstrom, who is their chief product officer for Paychex, but also has a long background with other things. And his comment is that the ongoing evolution of Paycor and Paychex Flex Time solutions empowers businesses to deploy the right individual to the right task at the right time. I think they're really emphasizing this idea that they're using this technology across both of those platforms, right, to some extent. And I think you're going to see they are still going to kind of keep those two brands separate, but with infusing some of the sort of the total enterprise investment they're making, right, which is what that merger and acquisition was all about.
Yeah. And you know what, Stacey, that actually reminds me, I wanted to apologize to one of our analyst friends, Pete Tiliakos. I made a silly joke about him on our LinkedIn because I had mentioned that Workday was going to have sort of a military skills platform, and I said if Pete had any skills, that's what they would appear. So, in atonement for that teasing joke, I'm going to read Pete's quote, just as you read Ryan Bergstrom's. This one was about the Insperity Workday HRScale. Said Insperity HRScale bridges the gap of the leap from legacy HR solutions to enterprise-grade systems out of reach for growing businesses. And now with HRScale, offering small and mid-sized businesses a streamlined path to a unified people, data, and services platform. So Thank you, Pete. That's a very good quote. And shout out to Pete. Sorry for the teasing.
If anybody knows Cliff, he has no intention of ever hurting anybody's feelings. He's actually got one of the most likely to say, "Oh, wait a minute, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings." From time to time, and when we're teasing, it does get us in trouble. That's what my dad used to say, Cliff. So I'll leave you with that.
Smart man. So speaking of learning, that's what we're doing here. This is a rough segue, but anyone who's been in the learning space knows SCORM. Right? So there's this company, Filtered. They use a lowercase f, but they've created SCORM Intelligence. So some pretty interesting work with SCORM, because that's actually been out of reach for a lot of companies, right? You'd mentioned, we can go through it because obviously Cornerstone kind of cornered the market, if you could. But I do believe Skooks might have had some abilities there. I could be wrong. People from Skooks reach out.
It isn't that they, almost all learning platforms can read SCORM, anyways. But it's being able to unpack it for the AI. That's the interesting thing here.
Yeah. Right? And some of the use cases they pointed out were pretty cool, such as updating references across all SCORMs. Like, you have different people in the company, reach out to this person and they're no longer there. So rather than having to go through individually and replace all of that, it can do it across that. And just basically keeping all of your learning content, or your SCORM specifically, up to date, and all that sort of stuff. So that's pretty cool. We haven't seen it in action, I should point out.
Well, and so here's the big thing. So I do know that Cornerstone is one of the few that have been able to take AI and actually work with SCORM packages. And this is one of the first standalone solutions that I've seen sort of do some of this. And again, for our non-learning geeks out there, SCORM is a shareable content object reference model. So again, back to the idea that common language makes everything matter. Those of you who may not remember back in the days, we used to create learning and you could not take learning outside of the environment you created it in, because basically you would lose all of the testing and the answers and the things that would then go into the things you would want from a performance reviewer or for whose name, or there was a ton of things you couldn't get out of a piece of content that was created in a platform or on a solution that couldn't be basically broken apart and used for reporting purposes. So SCORM became the reference model for which basically content would be packaged up and then made accessible for any kind of LMS to pull the data from. So we now could get training that was from any kind of location, as long as it was SCORM compliant, could then be read in any other LMS. It was a huge breakthrough in the learning days, huge breakthrough for cloud learning. And it was one of the biggest things that the first LMSs was ever able to do. Very similar to what we're talking about with what's going on with AI right now, the OpenClaw environment, all that stuff. It comes down to having standards that any tool can then read, right? And so what has been hard, though, is that formula, that model, is not easy for AI to read, because AI is really good at going in and scraping information, but it isn't very good at breaking through walls that were designed specifically for a table-based model to read. And so that's been a bit of a challenge, is been able to update and manage all the SCORM content. And to understand this is a multi-billion-dollar business, the amount of content that's been written in SCORM format. And people still don't want to go away from it, even though we have very different ways nowadays to sort of create content and show content, because we still have the same issue. Can you port that over and have the data read in a way that I need it to be read for all of the security and the configuration and the compliance and certifications I need? So this is a big deal. It's something to keep an eye on. Learning is not as easy as people oftentimes think, because they often think, oh, it's just a piece of content. I can import that content anywhere. It's like a video. When you think about all of the things that have to go into personalizing it, getting the right answers, tests, quizzes, things that go into really good learning, not just a video, that is a much different conversation, makes it much more complex, especially when you're certifying people to do things that are high levels of security or high levels of requirement. I would prefer anybody working on my nuclear plant to be highly certified with a lot of tests and a lot of very, very detailed performance settings, versus just a video that you watch and they hit a button and says it's done. So that's the kind of training that we're talking about here.
Yeah, that was such a good explanation that I'm going to actually jump, because I want while that's fresh in the mind of understanding SCORM, because there was a kind of a technical thing that had come out from Canva. We were going to talk about this later, but I'm going to jump to it now. So Canva now has what they're calling magic layers. So basically, by using their proprietary design model, they take what had just been, right? I think just like with learning, right? It was just this thing, and break it basically individual components that can then be edited. So almost anyone that's ever had to deal with like, here's just a JPEG, or here's like a flyer that we put out, or here's something we had made as a PDF or something that we're using for recruiting, for instance, something like that you would use for maybe recruitment marketing or anything in HR. This would be able to look over it and actually figure out the elements of the image, whether that be the text, whether that be the structure of what things are in front of other things and the color schemes. So you can actually take those elements that you'd used or that, had existed historically, that you, rather than having to recreate them, it basically now breaks them down into those individual elements that you can adjust them. It would almost be like taking an entire course and then making a SCORM out of it, right? Of saying these are the key elements. So pretty interesting for anyone that's doing any sort of design work, whether that's for internal or external marketing purposes within the HR space, and of course the non-HR space as well. I'm just considering that. What I did also find interesting is that a lot of times, though, most of the security that's on that has to do with like watermarks and, your branding and things like that. Will that make that sort of easier to bypass? Is there an issue there? It's an interesting question that I'll hopefully get an answer to, because I'll be out at Canva Create in April. But yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting, because that is the same issue that people that work in design may have faced before, right? Of saying, okay, I can't just convert this, right? It's almost like an example I was thinking of is like the hex codes or the RGBs. Sometimes when you've got a color, you're like, okay, I need to now make that in a totally different program. Well, here we go. Now you've got a code that can be transferred across. So yeah, it's a pretty big deal. It'll be interesting to see how that goes.
Well, and I think part of what you and I talked about was now if Canva can also destruct things like that, right? Like take something. At what point are we talking about the personal IP of a designer, of a person who created it, as the makeup of that graphic? Now, that may seem like a silly question, but for graphic artists, it's not, right? Like how I lay out or design something is really important to me. You change one element of it, that has an impact on sort of my.
It goes for writers as well.
It does, and there's going to be this really big line of, at what point does sort of all of this content become accessible at a granular level, and then at what point can we fake things, which gets really bigger. So this leads on to the conversation that I had highlighted, which didn't seem like it was really an HR conversation, but Grammarly recently had to pull back on an agent that it had released called the Expert Review. Now, they officially disabled Expert Review as of March 11th, 2026, but it was a huge backlash, because what Expert Review was supposed to do is it's supposed to be able to edit your content to sound like certain people in history that were known, or journalists or writers.
Alive and not alive.
Live and not alive, right? And now their idea was that we wanted to be able to give you a tool that would basically help you, both personal and not personal, sort of create something that would edit the way you would speak, right? Or the way you would write. But what happened was that, then all of a sudden, there's a whole conversation about whether that IP, about your personal approach to writing things, what was that, what should a company be allowed to do, or a person be allowed to use, right? I know I have I just had a conversation with someone today. It was, something didn't sound like me, and we had it had sort of run through some of our agents. I didn't present it as me. I presented it as just a concise output of some information. But I said, if I would have written it, would have been very different. And my agent is meant to understand how I write, not meant to write like me, right? All the time. And I think these are the conversations we're having inside of all of our work environments, especially if communications is a big part of our purview, right? So Cliff, you and I have talked a lot about, where does that line get drawn? These are very specific business examples of where those lines are. One is going forward and one has had to be pulled back, and it cost them, I would say at this point, probably pretty heftily numbers on their investments in AI right now for Grammarly, which, by the way, is probably the fourth. I want to say it's the fourth or fifth highest in our list of tools being utilized by professional HRs to do their job, where they're utilizing AI on a regular basis, right?
Yeah, exactly. It'll be interesting to see where they land this year. I did also note that the CEO that kind of put out this non-apology, Shishir Malhotra, lists the CEO as superhuman, which I believe is possibly what Grammarly's, kind of like Meta over Facebook. I believe that's their overall company. So pretty interesting. And it was, it's not good, right? I know specifically one of the authors was, one of the editors was Bell Hooks, who I don't know her personally, but, well, she's not alive anymore, but having read enough, I know for sure she would have been highly against this as someone who was very much against capitalistic exploitation of the lower class, especially as a black female writer. So, yeah, interesting. But
gotta know where our lines are at. We're going to have to figure them out, right?
Yeah, we do. Yeah, there's a number of different sort of stories, but it's sort of more. I don't know. I'm trying to think of a good segue.
A lighthearted conversation.
I was just thinking about artistic bringing this sort of artistic creativity rather than relying on others. We get some new branding. How about that? I alluded to one. It's not out of NDA yet, but one that is ICIMs. So they show up as number one for the enterprise space and user experience and vendor satisfaction for recruiting, talent acquisition, really the whole bundle there. And they've long been known as one of the largest, if not the largest, in that space. They have decided to capitalize all their letters now, just so you know. This really only matters to people like you and I that have to write
who have to write their names down 100 times on all the charts. Yes, but it was a really important thing for us.
Yeah, so they got new brand identity. They have a new AI sort of tool platform. It's called Coalesce. Another fun word to say. Thank you for that one. And that will be sort of their AI sort of overarching capability tool that sort of speaks on all of the different things in talent acquisition, right? While still staying within compliance. That's obviously a huge part of what they're trying to make sure that everyone sees. Also, they've got a new kind of logo. It looks like maybe two people in this shade of violet purple. Maybe it's two letters I. Trying to describe something visually, but I'm sure they'd be happy if you just go to their website and take a look, see what you think. So that's pretty cool. I don't know. Rebranding is one of those things where I'm always like, do we talk about it?
Such a hard time talking about it because I know it's but I do think the AI, the Coalesce AI, is probably the more interesting news here. And I do think, the one thing that they were pretty heavy to emphasize on that is that AI with human oversight. I think that's a big thing going on in the talent acquisition space right now. I just talked to someone today who I was kind of blown away with, who, without really understanding what's going on, they're doing an AI agent that is sort of doing selection without walking through what those numbers mean still. And I was like, at least at this day and age, we really cannot afford to have a black box when it comes to selection in AI agents for hiring, at least, particularly anywhere in any of the Western, European markets or in the U.S. market. So I think ICIMS has definitely really focused on making sure that their solutions are open, easy to understand, and that they have got a lot of human in the loop in the mixtures of what they're doing with AI. And they emphasize that here. And I think that's probably a little bit of what you see in their logo, probably, is this idea of sort of human plus AI and where that looks at, right?
I think that is what it is.
We're putting words in their mouths. I'm hoping.
Oh, no, I'm sure they would love that. They may steal it from you. They're going to use the Grammarly tool, steal your voice. Just kidding, our friends at Grammarly. Well, I don't have any. So, no enemies.
Way did not get enough sleep last night.
Yeah, seriously.
Everybody listening to this tonight's going to be like, oh, wow, they're punchy.
Yeah. So then we get, speaking of sort of simplicity and transparency, to very complex, but, it's interesting because Oracle is probably really at the forefront of the spend for infrastructure when it comes to AI, right? You may not realize it, but really they are one of the key linchpins to almost any of this AI because of the Starlink data centers and the amount of investment. That is a bit of a circular investment, right, with OpenAI. I highly recommend reading Ed Zitron for any of this stuff. But they released their Q3 for financial year 26 and beat estimations, I believe, just slightly, but still beat it. So up 22% year over year. So now at revenue 0.2 billion, net income 3.7 billion. So interestingly enough, their stock actually went up. That wasn't the case for some of the others that we've mentioned. just because of the general uncertainty around AI, but I guess they're sort of hoping to be in the picks and shovels space.
Yeah, and I think the big news here, Cliff, if I understood it, was that their AI revenue outpaced their enterprise software revenue. Now, granted, there's a lot of other things in that mix for them, including that's the hardware piece of that, right? There was a big write-up on it by one of our friends in the analyst space, Josh Burson, go take a look at what Josh says. I think what you're going to find is that there's also some things that he might have misstated there that we, Chris Leone, who heads up the AI agentic work across the entire Oracle platform, pushed back on, that there was some unfactual data about what their agents did and how their agents do it. But I do think the big news here is Oracle is stating, or at least through these numbers are trying to state that the AI is the future of where their revenue is going to come from, right? And I will say there is no other enterprise software in the market right now that's completely hitting that double digit, and especially not in the 20% range, right? Revenue growth at that level. So we'll see. I think we'll right. See. There is a lot of what I would call is light funding or a lot of air in these numbers when you come to think about sort of how much of this is based off of loans and loans to each other, right? So I think we're ones to always be careful about that in our data set, but that also includes OpenAI, and Claude has that same issue. Almost every large AI platform has that issue, right? What you really have to look at with the enterprise platform, because this is the conversation, is SaaS dead? The answer is no, right? Like there is so much to be done across the market. The actual place where the data sits is really, really important. But I think also too, most of those solutions are not building on that large of a debt models, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. I guess I would say just always have eventualities planned out, right? If, for instance, they need to claw back a lot of debt and the prices go up, how much are you on a model that requires, as you were talking about, usage? How much do you want to cut people that might have certain skills that you're going to have to hire back if you no longer can afford the AI agents or they're not available anymore? So, plan for both eventualities. I think a lot of it has been fear-based on it's going to take all the jobs and it's going to do all that. But what about the other possibility that it's not there anymore? It's not able to pay for itself. Have you put all your chips in when instead you should be more moderate risk, right?
Yeah, and Oracle also, I think it announced, I don't think it was today, I think it was actually a couple days ago, but Oracle also announced they were going to do a possibility, or at least there was possibility of another large layoff. So I think, again, just keeping your eye on that is really important.
Yeah, well said. So then we get some moves around with some people. Eric Waldinger is at Employ. Employ is probably not the name you know, but they're Jazz HR, Lever, and JobVite. I actually think it's Lever. I always say Lever because of the soap. But Eric's pretty interesting. I was looking at his background, and although he started sort of in the HR space, Robert Half and Career Builder, mostly he's been at sort of investment and real estate management, things like that, companies I don't know well or at all. So he referred to coming back to HR technology as returning to his roots. Pretty interesting. But it is kind of interesting. We'll see this with a couple people that we're going to be getting into, that it's really about understanding financial risk and compliance when it comes to a number of these things, as everyone's kind of moving into this further integration of roles across technology, revenue, and people, right? Yeah.
They also had a new CEO that came in just recently too, right?
Yeah, they'll be coming on the last one. Jerry Zhao came in the last one. In fact, new chief information officer, I think, at the same time as well. So very much big changes in terms of people over at Employ. They're definitely going to be one that will be probably, I bet, popping up in the news quite a bit if they're sort of making those sort of investments in the people. I wouldn't be surprised to see some of the either through mergers and acquisitions or new products come out as well. It would be almost stranger if it didn't happen. No stranger to us, Jennifer Johnston, starting as Vice President of Global Partner Management for Support Services at UKG. Pretty interesting because her background, which you noted, Stacey, and I also find this fascinating, is she comes from Intuit, a name that I don't think we talked about much 5 years ago, and now seems to be talked about quite a bit. So pretty fascinating when you think about going from that company, from Intuit to UKG. Interesting for both companies, really.
Yeah, one of the Again, Intuit's kind of a B2B plus a B2C solution, right, in the market. And I think they're one that crossover doesn't hurt as much, right, as we see with some of the other solutions where sometimes a business to consumer doesn't translate as well. Intuit definitely does. And we're seeing in our data that Intuit is showing up a lot more on the payroll side. And as they're expanding to that payroll solution, right, in, competition with someone like what we're seeing at Gusto or that level, right? So I do think that bringing someone from that, and Intuit has major partnerships. We see that across the market. Like we see them as partnerships with a lot of organizations. So this play, and Jennifer Johnson, I've known her in some other roles before. So this was great to see. I think we're going to get an opportunity to see UKG kind of rethinking their strategy around partnerships. Right?
Another big move, especially another company that had some quarterly earnings calls come out, that's not related, I don't think, is Adobe. Their CEO, Shantanu Narayan, is stepping down, although there isn't a specific time frame on that. Shantanu said that he's going to wait until a successor is named rather than anything else. What's pretty interesting, and I watched a few interviews with him from a while back, just because, to think a CEO of such a big company, because I guess it's only sort of tangentially related to HR, although it's definitely a tool I use quite a bit, and probably many of us do, Adobe's tool sets. It's definitely one of those ones that's like, I guess it is in the HR space, but not as direct. I just didn't know much about him. And you start to think about that timeline of when he came in, right? He comes in right before the global financial crisis, and then he has to get him through COVID as well. He's been there since 2007. So talk about coming in and being asked to deal with some major sort of upsets. I think I'd be ready to retire too. Now it's something else. Like, I'm sick of it, guys. I'm done.
And I think it's important to note that he came out of Adobe in 1990 as the vice president and general manager, and he became CEO in 2007. That he's been in the Adobe from the beginning. And Adobe was a publishing software. They became a huge marketing, and then their acquisition of the learning space, they acquired a lot of the solutions I used to work with back in the day, which were sort of some of the cutting edge learning technology. And then graphics technology too, as well, right? And then they were the premier video editing technologies. They're smack dab in the middle of this AI storm, because this is the kind of things AI is automatically doing for people now, without, and again, question becomes, they're doing it because they have access to sort of IP from designers who have done it in the past, right? So this gets to be a very, very sort of fluid conversation about, where does this line get drawn? And how long will AI be able to do that if we put more of the artistic capabilities behind firewall, so it doesn't have someone to learn from? Always keep that in mind. AI has to learn from someone. If you don't give it someone to learn from, then what happens, right? If they lock up their material tighter, that makes it even harder. I think probably what we're seeing with Adobe is probably like any of the other systems. You're going to need someone to lead them through what is going to be a very bumpy next couple of years as they try and figure out how do we hold on to our business models in the midst of a highly changing environment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's exactly kind of what Canva is looking to do too, right? With their tools, right? Is very much go after some of that market share that they see Adobe as weak. And we did see a drop in Adobe shares, although, as you had mentioned, Stacey, that's kind of been across the board as the impact of AI is being felt. But Adobe shares are down 23% this year. That might have also been one of the driving forces towards the change in leadership as they need to navigate some of these tough calls. An interesting one here that also has to do with people, but a few things, right, is ServiceNow. And some of these stories we've brought up before. There was one you sent to me from friend of the show, Tim Crawford, that sort of put together some of the pieces to understand what may be driving ServiceNow's movements, including having a new CIO. So just in the last 30 days from the time of recording this, I should mention that Adobe story is probably one of the newest ones I've ever broken. I think it was just 3 hours ago that was announced. So ServiceNow in the last 30 days has acquired MoveWorks, very much AI. Then we get Armis, which we talked about on this show, which was security and risk management. And now they've hired a new president and CIO, Hussein Nobar, who's going to be president and chief legal officer. So that's pretty interesting because Nobar came from Microsoft. So if you were looking to say, I need the person with the biggest probably set of knowledge and experience in dealing with legal issues as it relates to AI, I think that's who you'd go for, right? And that seems to be Tim's take on it too. So I'm just going to read from him, so I don't want to plagiarize his fine work. He says the hiring of Nobar indicates ServiceNow's awareness that governance and trust with AI is going to be a critical but complicated process. Nobar's experience at Microsoft and standing in the community brings strength and experience that ServiceNow needs to further their efforts in AI. So this kind of all ties together. It is kind of interesting when the stories seem to have those connections, which is how do we now deal with the changing reality of AI beyond it just being, here's this cool thing it can do that is now an infrastructure layer, and then what do we do about the risk and how do we make it as efficient as possible? And some of that won't come just from the tech. You're going to need to understand the external factors as well and the legal capabilities, and as sort of new precedents are being set, right? So I think that that's a reasonable assumption to make, is how those three things go together.
I would completely agree. And I think it's also worth noting that ServiceNow is putting a stake in the ground, I think, too, that they want to be a solution of choice for your AI governance and decision making and sort of the ownership of that AI sort of innovation inside your organization. Now, that goes directly to what we're now hearing from Workday, what we also are similarly hearing from Oracle, right? So the big players in this market, and then we also know that we haven't really heard a whole lot, but we're getting there out of what's going on at Google and what's going on at Amazon. There's some news breaking in it up and, market around what Amazon's doing with their investments in AI. This market, the behemoths are moving and they're making steps, and somebody's going to come out maybe on top, or maybe there will be enough room for everybody to have a space, and we just don't know yet, right?
Yeah, that's exactly it. Well, Stacey, we are at an hour, so you ready for the speed round, the STT speed round? So this is pretty interesting. This was a McKinsey report. Just kidding, love you guys. State of Organizations 2026. 3 tectonic forces are reshaping organizations, but really it came to 9 things. I don't know, McKinsey. But I'm going to look at these. And what's interesting, Stacey, is that you've been pointing these out for a while, and we've put these in the report, and it's good to see it sort of validated by another report that had over 10,000 senior executives, almost the same amount as ours. Only 15 countries and only 16 industries, but they did their best over at McKinsey. But all teasing aside, some pretty interesting things, and it is nice to see it validated or framed a different way. So of course we see AI, right? The connection between humans and AI agents, as we talked about before, and how that will play out. Leveraging AI to rewrite the future of shared services. Pretty fascinating, especially in light of the ServiceNow and a few of the other things we've talked about, right? Because it won't just be the tech, it'll be the services that we need to find and automate. Then finding value in a new geopolitical context. I always find that one interesting too, because I feel like people just didn't want to talk about that stuff. They just, I don't want to talk about that or something, because whenever you bring it up in basically any setting, it's like, look, we have to talk about the fact that these, wars are real, and there is a disruption in a supply chain, and that matters for HR. Like, it really does.
We gave an example at the last event we were just at, Cliff, and everybody in the room goes, yeah, I've got an example similar to that for my customer, right? Which was, shifting where products were being delivered from because of one, risks to the supply chain line, and 2, because the cost of tariffs that were going up from one nation to the other, right? These are very real things that everybody's dealing with, right?
Yeah. Interesting too, the sort of productivity frontier. We've been talking about productivity is one of those, doing the right things. So, you get some governance and compliance. And then one I didn't expect was heavily, or at least an increasing focus on diversity and inclusion. So basically, what they found is nearly half of the organization that scaled back their D&I efforts plan to then increase them, basically saying we maybe went too far with that. I mean, we actually need these, which we've been saying all along.
We've been saying, and our data isn't quite, our data kind of takes a different take on that. The roles themselves we aren't seeing being increased. Those are still on decline. What we are seeing increase is the use of demographics as a metric that we're tracking, not as DEI as that, right? But that is basically how we are telling many of HR people to sort of make sure you keep facts and data, because eventually we're going to come back around to that conversation. Just don't lose your facts and your data, which to me centers around what they're saying here as well.
Exactly. I know it would be interesting to do a breakdown of our data to look at those that have said that they're cutting the DEI efforts and see their comparison of those that are going to increase versus those that hadn't done that, right? And I think we'll probably see the same, that they're going to kind of claw those back quietly. And then this one is pretty interesting. So Claude, the AI tool, now has an HR plugin. They give very limited sort of use cases. And to me, it didn't seem that earth-shattering, so maybe they don't want it to be. But tell me what you think, Stacey. So they just give a few examples. You put in this plugin, and it says you can use human resources to do performance review, draft a performance review summary, onboarding, create a 30, 60, 90-day onboarding plan for a new product manager. Couldn't you do that already, just in the general system? Am I missing something?
Yeah, I mean, the idea here is that do I need? I think we've had this conversation that we saw the use of AI slash plus productivity tools rise in our survey this year as part of your HRMS environment, right? And it's not on decline. Like a lot of people use it in the 500 and below as, an Excel spreadsheet becomes your tool for onboarding, right? But in this environment, we're seeing it increase in bigger companies, and we're seeing it being as part of sort of the in-between space. I think Claude is just taking advantage of that, saying, well, I can create you a 30, 60, 9-day onboarding and then dump it into a sheet. And again, not as trackable as you would have with an HR environment, but yes, creating some of those tools and some of those things. So I don't think this is groundbreaking. I think this is basically for maybe someone who either doesn't know, hasn't done that in the past, or doesn't have any experience in it. It's maybe a tool that might give you some outlines or some starting points. When I put this out, I said, is this, I put a question mark, right? Like, is it worth talking about? We do know people are excited about it. So there's also, to be fair, like Qualtrics has an HR plugin that is meant to sort of be an employee feedback tool, which again, they are now a full-fledged employee feedback tool, but previously they weren't. I think, the question is, will this grow into something bigger? Most of the HR systems, I think, would say that it could maybe do some of the lighter stuff. It's never going to be able to do your payroll for you, right? That will be the challenge, right? And I would have to be one that would agree on that side. I don't think it's ever going to do your payroll for you, right?
That's right. Well, if they want to hear some more of your opinions, where can they find you, Stacey? Where can they find us? I think both of us
Where are we going to be at? All right,
yeah.
so we're wrapping up today. Funny enough, Tammy, who is our data scientist, will be at the Qualtrics event March 16th through the 20th in Seattle, Washington. So if you are going to be there and you want to catch up with the person who actually programs the survey and might be able to slip in one more question if you have it for the company, that's going to be Tammy Smith. She'll be at Qualtrics. Not myself or you, but Allison Williams and Summer Orleana, who are two of our amazing team members, our director of research programs, and Summer, who's our growth and client specialist. We'll be in Las Vegas at the Unleash conference March 16th and 20th as well. So if you are going to Unleash and want to touch base with someone from the Sapient team, you definitely want to connect with them. On March 16th, I will be here in Raleigh for a upcoming event called 321 Coffee Conference Day. That actually is something we're sponsoring here in Raleigh, North Carolina. It's a wonderful organization association. If you're on our Christmas gift list, you know why. Please look it up, 321 Coffee. If you're in the area, you definitely want to support that community organization. We'll also, I think, be at Transform March 23rd through 25th. We're going to be doing a lunch and learn with our Clear company organization, and we'll also be doing a session on rethinking the talent acquisition for the trade industry. I have some really special people who will be on that panel. Kim Seals and another person from the TPMA organization who will be talking about how organizations are granting and writing up things with skills trades, and how organizations like healthcare and manufacturing organizations are sort of rethinking the idea of hiring with the idea that I've got to have lots of skilled trades workers who have high-tech skill capabilities. So that's going to be in Las Vegas. Cliff, I'll also be April 13th and 13th in Infor in Atlanta, Georgia. And then finally, we're going to have you also at ADP, right?
Yeah, also on the East Coast in Orlando. I'll be at ADP's Meeting of the Minds. Always a really good one there. Can't wait to see everyone. So yeah, no reason not to go to Orlando. Come visit. Immediately after that, I will go to Canva Create, as I mentioned before. And really interested to see how they are sort of creating and really expanding into the HR space in a number of different ways. Immediately after that, the next week, April 23rd, 24th, Stacey, you and Summer will be going over to balmy Amsterdam in Holland.
I'm hoping for good weather again. So that we're going to be at the HR Tech Europe conference put on by the ARC group, and excited to do that. We'll be doing one of the very first, what they're calling, I can't remember what they're calling now. But basically, it's a mini sort of like coaching, mentoring, storytelling where we're doing a session up front, a session at the end, where basically we're going to be walking participants through sort of how they should think about content, information, and data, and making sure that they all around introduction to HR technology. So I'm really excited about this because it's going to be an opportunity to basically take a cohort of people through the entire event. We're going to be doing the same thing this year at the HR Tech Conference here in the United States as well. So I'm excited to see how these work because I love working with cohorts and with people all the way through an event. So yeah.
Yeah. And I know we mentioned the last episode, there's HR Tech expands to the Middle East. Obviously, timing's not great for the conversation, but as things settle down, that might also be a worthwhile conversation to have out there as we're starting to talk to some customers already planning for that type of things. I do think that that's a really great methodology for imparting some of these stories. Around the same time you're there, in fact, the exact same time you'll be in Amsterdam, I'll be in Napa Valley at Workday Innovation Summit. Really excited about that. It's going to be a great mixture of, intense sort of learning and going through everything, but also it's Napa Valley. There's fun to be had, and it's just a beautiful setting. The next week, Stacey, you're passing me in midair, possibly.
Yeah, we'll also be in San Francisco area for the Oracle analyst event where they basically give us an update on what's happening in the market. We'll be getting a lot of news, I think, about a lot of the stuff we just talked about today. And then the following week, or kind of the end of that same week, you are going to be heading to WorkHuman along with Susan Richards, our founder. And that's going to be back in Orlando again, right, Cliff?
That's right. Susan and I went last year to Denver for that, and they must have a deal with Gaylord because it was at the Gaylord there as well. Beautiful setting, a really great environment. It reminds me of the events that, I can't remember, OC Tanner puts on, right?
Yeah.
Where it's really about empowering employees. It's very much individual contributors as much as anyone else, and it's really nice to see that and see them being represented and recognized as that is their raison d'etre there. The end of that week, I will then pop over to the Bell Labs in Northern Jersey for ICIMs, which I now have to change their name to the new brand. ICIMs, you can't see it, but I've spelled it in the old way. I apologize. And that is just April. No need to get into May just yet.
We're not going to get into May just yet, but we will next time. Cliff, it's been kind of a crazy week, but we are, as we're wrapping things up, just want to let everybody know that if you have an event or something that you want us to attend, please let us know. Because the calendars are filling up very quickly. We did not even mention what I'm doing in May, and we've got multiple things going on in the May timeframe. Speaking of that, as we wrap today, I do want to just remind people that our full enterprise report, annual HR system survey, is out on the website, as well as some of our segment reports. We just got notified by us for that. I think there was a big uptick in some downloads. We do have a couple of free segments out there, right? So particularly our blueprints out there, some of our HR business of HR segments. So if you're kind of looking to understand what that report is about and you just want to see some of the areas that we've provided as part of our research center that is available to everyone, please log in and just add your name. That's all we ask, and you get access to some of those elements. But
if I could, Stacey, that reminds me, another thing that we just got an update on right before the show is, speaking of downloads, is we just got the rankings out from Million Podcasts that looks at podcasts across all others. We are number 6 globally for HR Tech podcasts. And of course, since that's based on, downloads and listenership, that is thanks to you, the listeners and viewers of this podcast. And I got to tell you, it makes us very happy. We don't want to be shouting into the void. We welcome all your feedback. That's why we ask for it. To see those sort of numbers and I also want to point out we're number 2 in terms of female-led podcasts. I did my own analytics on that, by the way. And probably the only one that's based on general news. There's a heavy recruiting one that gets a little more in tactical knowledge, which I find valuable as well, that's above us. But it's humbling to see the outpouring of interest that you guys have all shown. And so thank you so much. It makes us feel good, and hopefully we're providing value to you, and that's why you keep coming back. So thank you for that.
If you are looking for all the things that you want to get updated on from us on an ongoing basis, please go to our website and sign up for our newsletter to get ongoing updates for our research launches, where we'll be speaking, visiting, and when you can participate in our annual survey, because that newsletter really does have a lot of this information in it. And then be sure to listen to our sister HR Huddle podcast, HR We Have a Problem, hosted by our CEO, Terry Zipper. She had a great one on last week, so if you haven't seen it, on compliance, which I thought was really good, well worth a listen to. And then if you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe. More importantly, give us some ratings on Apple and Spotify and all those areas. That really makes a difference to us. Please, please, please give us a rating. That always helps. And then to stay up to date with immediate breaking HR tech news and get all the behind the scenes content, you can follow us at Sapience on LinkedIn and on Instagram. We may be starting some new Instagram programs around Cliff and all his travels. We'll let you know how that goes. So where is Cliff in the world these days?
Yeah.
And then thanks to our production team, as always, Brand Method Media Group, who helps us produce our podcast run by their amazing founder, Kelly Kelly. We couldn't do this without them. To our marketing team, Summer Orlano, Cole Harris, Linda Galloway, Caitlin Diamond now. I think all of them have their hands in getting this up and running. And obviously, Cliff, to you as well. We could not get all of this out. If you don't, if you just listen to us and you want to see links to everything, every week Cliff puts out a very long write up on what goes on in this podcast and all the links to all of the articles. So that's a great way to get all the information in one place. And thank you to our listeners and community. We couldn't do this without you. But Cliff, I think we have run through our time. I know you've got someplace to be. So that's it for this episode of Spilling the Tea on HR Tech. We hope it's been just the brew you need to start the engines running this week. And we'll be back in 2 weeks with just another pot of boiling hot HR Tech updates and insights. Bye, everyone.